Chapter 13 of The Defiant Agents. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by R.J. Davis. The Defiant Agents by Andre Norton. Chapter 13. The rasp of something wet and rough persisted against his cheek. Travis tried to turn his head to avoid the contact, and was answered by a burst of pain which trailed off into a giddiness, making him fear another move, no matter how minor. He opened his eyes and saw the pointed ears, the outline of a coyote head between him and a dull gray sky, was able to recognize Nalik'ideyu. A wetness other than that from the coyote's tongue slid down his forehead now. The dull clouds overhead had released the first heavy rain Travis had experienced since their landing on Topaz. He shivered as the chill damp of his clothes made him aware that he must have been laying out in the full force of the downpour for some time. It was a struggle to get to his knees, but Nalik'ideyu mouthed a hold on his shirt, tugging and pulling, so that somehow he crept into a hollow beneath the branches of a tree where the spouting water was lessened by a few pattering drops. There the Apache's strength deserted him again, and he could only hunch over, his bent knees against his chest, trying to endure the throbbing misery in his head, the awful floating sensation which followed any movement. Fighting against that, he tried to remember just what had happened. The meeting with Deklay and at least 4 or 5 others. Then the Apache accusation of witchcraft. A serious thing in the old days. Old days? To Deklay and his fellows, these were the old days. And the threat that Deklay or some other had shouted at him, Dinalikida, meant literally, "It won't dawn for you. Death." Stones. The last thing Travis remembered were the stones. Slowly his hands went out to explore his body. There was more than one bruised area on his shoulders and ribs, even on his thighs. He must still have been a target after he had fallen under the stone which had knocked him unconscious. Stoned, outlawed, but why? Surely Deklay's hostility could not have swept Buck, Jay Lee, Tsoay, even Nolan, into agreeing to that. Now he could not think straight. Travis became aware of warmth, not only of warmth and the soft touch of a furred body by his side, but a comforting communication of mind, a feeling he had no words to describe adequately. Nalik'ideyu was sitting crowded against him, her nose thrust up to rest on his shoulder. She breathed in soft breaths which stirred the loose locks of his rain-damp hair. And now he flung one arm around her, a gesture which brought a whisper of answering whine. He was past wondering about the actions of the coyotes, only supremely thankful for Nalik'ideyu's present companionship. And a moment later, when her mate squeezed under the low loop of a branch and joined them in this natural wickiup, Travis held out his other hand, drew it lovingly across Naginta's wet hide. "Now what?" he asked aloud. Deklay could only have taken such a drastic action with the majority of the clan solidly behind him. It could well be that this reactionary was the new chief, this act of Travis's expulsion merely adding to Deklay's growing prestige. The shivering which had begun when Travis recovered consciousness still shook him at intervals. Back on Terra, like all the others in the team, he had had every inoculation known to the space physicians, including several experimental ones. But the cold virus could still practically immobilize a man, and this was no time to give body room to chills and fever. Catching his breath as his movements touched to life the pain in one bruise after another, Travis peeled off his soaked clothing, rubbed his body dry with handfuls of last year's leaves, cold from the thick carpet under him, knowing there was nothing he could do until the whirling in his head disappeared. So he burrowed into the leaves until only his head was uncovered and tried to sleep. The coyotes curled up one on either side of his nest. He dreamed, but later could not remember any incident from those dreams, save a certain frustration and fear. When he awoke, again to the sound of steady rain, it was dark. He reached out. Both coyotes were gone. His head was clear and suddenly he knew what must be done. As soon as his body was strong enough, he too would return to instincts and customs of the past. The situation was desperate enough for him to challenge Deklay. In the dark, Travis frowned. He was slightly taller and 3 or 4 years younger than his enemy. But Deklay had the advantage in a stouter build and longer reach. However, Travis was sure that in his present life, Deklay had never fought a duel, Apache fashion. And an Apache duel was not a meeting anyone entered into lightly. Travis had the right to enter the rancheria and deliver such a challenge. Then Deklay must meet him or admit himself in the wrong. That part of it was simple. But in the past, such duels had just one end, a fatal one for at least one of the fighters. If Travis took this trail, he must be prepared to go the limit. And he didn't want to kill Deklay. There were too few of them here on Topaz to make any loss less than a real catastrophe. While he had no liking for Deklay, neither did he nurse any hatred. However, he must challenge the other or remain a tribal outcast. And Travis had no right to gamble with time and the future, not after what he had learned in the tower. It might be his life and skill, or Deklay's, against the blotting out of them all, and their home world into the bargain. First, he must locate the present camp of the clan. If Nolan's arguments had counted, they would be heading south away from the pass, and to follow would draw him further from the Tower Valley. Travis's battered face ached as he grinned bitterly. This was another time when a man could wish he were two people. A scout on sentry duty at the valley, the fighter heading in the opposite direction to have it out with Deklay. But since he was merely one man, he would have to gamble on time, one of the trickiest risks of all. Before dawn, Nalik'ideyu returned, carrying with her a bird, or at least birds must have been somewhere in the creature's ancestry. But the present representative of its kind had only vestigial remnants of wings, its trailing feet and legs well developed and far more powerful. Travis skinned the corpse, automatically putting aside some spine quills to feather future arrows. Then he ate slivers of dusky meat raw, throwing the bones to Nalik'ideyu. Though he was still stiff and sore, Travis was determined to be on his way. He tried mind contact with the coyote, picturing the Apaches, notably Deklay, as sharply as he could by mental image. And her assent was clear in return. She and her mate were willing to lead him to the tribe. He gave a light sigh of relief. As he slogged on through the depressing drizzle, the Apache wondered again why the coyotes had left him before and waited in the Tower Valley. What link was there between the animals of Terra and the remains of the long-ago empire of the stars? For he was certain it was not by chance that Nalik'ideyu and Naginta had lingered in that misty place. He longed to communicate with them directly, to ask questions and be answered. Without their aid, Travis would never have been able to track the clan. The drizzle alternated with splashing bursts of rain, torrential enough to drive the trackers to the nearest cover. Overhead, the sky was either dull bronze or night black. Even the coyotes paced nose to ground, often making wild casts for the trail while Travis waited. The rain lasted for 3 days and nights, filling watercourses with rapidly rising streams. Travis could only hope that the others were having the same difficulty traveling that he was. Perhaps the more so since they were burdened with packs. The fact that they kept on meant that